Well, I guess I'm done with YouTube. I guess I could, like, get a hobby or something. What? Huh? I mean, yeah, I could do that. Would people really care about what a random person on the internet has to say, or how they would rank things? Yeah, you know, after I got my degree, I thought I would know everything, but I feel like I know less now. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay.
A game is only as good as the sum of its worlds, and luckily for Kingdom Hearts 1, I think all of its worlds earn a passing grade at absolute minimum. Even in the most flawed locales, you can find at least a few positive qualities to outshine the negative, and I wouldn't call any of the worlds in this game bad, not even close. This was basically the least corny way I could think of to say that each one is special in one way or another. Ranking them would be arbitrary and reductive, so let's do that. I don't have like a rigid criteria or a point system for each component in a world, but basically my rankings are going to be a synthesis of pretty much everything having to do with the world. Level design, its story, its significance, its appearance, its characters, and how fun it is to play. Some of these, especially the bottom and top few, are pretty locked in, but I'm liable to change my opinion on most of the stuff in the middle. This video is going to cover numbers 13 to 8, and part 2 will go over 7 to 1, because I've got a lot to say. This isn't some easy bake factory line watch Mojo super fast jellyfish bullshit ass content. We're going in depth here. So get comfortable and get ready to yell at me for how high I have that world you hate. Let's rank some levels from a nearly 2-decade-old video game, shall we? So minigames sure are an interesting thing in video games, huh? Maybe I'm just projecting, but I don't feel like I often see or talk to people who really enjoy when their game diverts from its genre and plops you into a small, unrelated adventure. That might just be because I don't often see or talk to people, period, but I digress.
Guess you don't get out much, huh?
If a game's core conceit is playing a bunch of minigames like a Mario Party, it's obviously not something that I get annoyed by. But when I go from fighting a dark satanic clone of myself to pushing an overweight bear on a tree swing like half an hour later, my neck starts to hurt from the mood whiplash, and my hands get confused. I feel like I should be mashing X and hoping that Pooh drops a rare synthesis material by the time I'm through with him. I get that it's a bit rich to be whining about tonal shift in a game like Kingdom Hearts, which is basically fueled by the absurdity of Sephiroth and Piglet occupying the same game world, but still. That's really only part of my issue with 100 Acre Wood, and I hesitate to even say I have issues with it because it's really quite charming, and it's hard to get too worked up about it considering it's entirely optional. Thing is, there's quite a few quality rewards to reap from appeasing the imaginary locals, and as someone who's needed these rewards for a variety of playthroughs I've done, 2 of which have gone toward videos on this channel in just the past 30 days, I have become increasingly fatigued from suffering through some of the most bare-bones minigames the series has to offer. And that's partly my own fault, but we've got to pick something for the bottom spot, and there wasn't too much of a contest here. Once the initial charm of seeing these characters and this world wears off, and unfortunately that happened about 17 years ago for the most part, the 100 Acre Wood is the world that feels most like a chore. I still don't know what the best way to tackle it is, because you can portion it out over like 5 or 6 visits, or you can save it all until post-Halloween Town and just do everything then. You basically choose between it being a recurring nuisance or a prolonged ordeal, which are 2 phrases that I have long been associated with. I haven't really played through KH2's 100 Acre Wood in a while, and I've definitely done so less times, but I remember the minigames feeling much more tolerable, or at least more visually entertaining. It's a rare occasion of me vastly preferring the KH2 version of a world that's present in both 1 and 2. I mean, if a man put his gunblade to your head and told you to pick your favorite 100 Acre Wood minigame in KH1, what would you pick? It's not like there's really even one that stands out above the rest. First of all, if you say Pooh's Swing, I think you deserve whatever misfortune is coming for you in life. Muddy Path shouldn't even be something you can repeat again. I don't really know where the fun is in seeing how quickly you can guide a meandering Pooh around the area after doing it the first time. So what's the favorite? The giant pot? The honey tree? Maybe it should be Block Tigger because it mercifully requires the least thought, so you can kind of just check out. I think the best area in the world is the bouncing spot, and almost entirely because of everything separate of the minigames. If the world had more areas like these for puzzle platforming type things, I think it'd be a more bearable experience. The best way to do minigames, if you ask me, is to incorporate skills or abilities that are relevant to the core gameplay, and I think KH2 and KH3's Mushroom 13 and Flans do better in this regard. Another of my favorite games of all time, Spyro Year of the Dragon, is largely made up of minigames and sub-areas, but they almost always incorporate core gameplay mechanics into what you need to do, and so I look forward to certain minigames in that game instead of dreading them. In KH1's 100 Acre Wood, I don't feel like I'm using anything I've learned when I'm pressing triangle next to some carrots or arbitrarily timing my R1 button press to the flap of an owl's wings. That all being said, this could have been a lot worse.
We're hitting the road, our worlds are all connected.
And as I mentioned, it's still really charming. And dude, whenever Piglet just eats shit, it honestly makes my day. Underwater levels being less than great is like one of the coldest takes in video gaming, but that doesn't mean it's a bad take. It is a take I am going to make. As much as I love KH1, even it couldn't break out of that negative stereotype surrounding water worlds. I have to say though, I really think they did about as well as they could have. It's easy to forget that this game came out in 2002 because this world is more tolerable than I think it has any right to be. It's no coincidence that the two lowest ranked worlds here are the ones that do the most in shaking up the core gameplay, but Atlantica is at least taking some big swings here, which I much prefer over the kind of swings that the 100 Acre Wood deals in. I think Atlantica, more than any other world, serves as a reminder that games in open 3D spaces were still basically in the toddler stage at the time of KH1. I think every other world does a good job at distracting you from that fact, but Atlantica giving you a full range of motion in every direction, while ambitious, just isn't up to snuff when compared to the land-based worlds. It's hard to draw a whole lot of inspiration from the source material. There aren't too many set pieces to draw from aside from the palace and the grotto and whatnot, so everything in between ends up being these sort of indistinguishable ocean spaces that kind of blend together. And unlike any other world in the game, I think the developers knew that this world was a bit nondescript and disorienting because they put these trident symbols on the wall so the player can refocus themselves and make it easier to know where they are relative to the palace. The world is also guilty of one of the worst progression barriers in the series, and it's something I sort of subtly referenced in my KH1 vs 2 video. The whole mechanic of needing the dolphin to access the sunken ship area is just not 100% thought out. Like, I think it needed a bit more workshopping. There is, in fact, in-game text to nudge the player along, but I don't know, I always found it a bit bothersome and a bit too reliant on the player needing to talk to an NPC when doing that normally doesn't really pay off at many other points in the game. Even so, hitching a ride on the dolphin in the gorge area doesn't actually visibly accomplish anything. You'll just ride around in a loop forever. As a kid, when I finally actually grabbed onto the dolphin, I figured I must have done it wrong, but no, you just need to grab on, then get off, and then no, you need to go to the undersea valley area and do it again. I don't know why you couldn't have just been taken from the gorge to the sunken ship, but I think that simple change would have gone a long way in making this world less confusing. Of course, the combat is also pretty much cut off at the knees in Atlantica. You're losing access to all of your summons and your substantial combat abilities. So a lot of the fighting in this world boils down to swimming up to an enemy and unleashing some basic combos and then having to swim after them when they're knocked away, maybe using some magic here and there. For anyone who finds the combat in KH1 too simple already, Atlantica probably isn't too helpful in convincing them otherwise. I don't necessarily find it frustrating or clumsy, but it's definitely more boring. In terms of story, or maybe theming would be the better word, I do like how they use Ariel as a parallel to Sora, Riku, and Kairi at the start of their journeys, and the more I think about it, I guess Ariel's experience in this world is closest to Riku's on Destiny Islands. They both want to see the outside world, and their ambitions lead them to make a choice that causes misfortune for their friends and families. It's a pretty neat remix on the plot of the film. It still stays true to Ariel's general motivations, but it's altered a bit to be more familiar to the grander narrative of the game. So thematically, I think the world is pretty strong, though story-wise, it's probably one of the weaker Disney worlds, at least in terms of how much the important chess pieces get moved along and how much more we learn about the Kingdom Hearts universe. The exception here is, of course, the cutscene known as Clashing Heads, where King Triton destroys the Crystal Trident and then just busts out some lore and lets Sora and the player know that he's apparently totally cognizant of Keyblades, their wielders, and their apparent destructive nature. This scene is so interesting to me because within the confines of KH1 itself, it's really never expanded upon, and the next time we would get any inkling of there being Keyblade users prior to Sora and Riku would be in the late game of KH2, probably most explicitly when Xigbar uses the term the others in comparison to Sora. Now, about 4 to 5 years after that moment, it became clear to us that Xigbar was talking about Terra, Aqua, and Ven, though we know King Triton obviously never had any run-ins with that trio. Of course, about 13 to 14 years after that moment, it became clearer to us that Xigbar can also be talking about, you know, much older Keyblade wielders. I'm not suggesting Nomura had Union Cross Keyblade War plot points in mind back in 2002 or even 2005, but it's certainly interesting that we have just the smallest breadcrumb from all the way back then. King Triton is a potentially ancient and timeless being, and I guess at some point back when the worlds were still connected, he managed to learn about the Keyblade, and what he learned was apparently pretty disheartening. Are they ever going to revisit this very minor plot point? Definitely not, but it can sort of be explained and theorized about, and isn't that what we're all here for? As a kid, out of the first 3 Disney worlds you have available after beating Traverse Town, I was most hyped about Deep Jungle. Tarzan came out in 1999, I was about 3 at the time, and that was a movie that got a lot of watches from me in the years that followed. I was big on the Tarzan, even had a Tarzan birthday cake as a kid. I lost some weight since then. Looking back, I have no idea why I was such a Tarzan stan in 1999. I was not and am not an outdoorsy person, and I don't think Tarzan is even a top 10 favorite Disney movie for me, so maybe it really just comes down to it being a VHS tape that I owned and watched many times, because what else is there to do when you're 4? So yes, I was pretty jazzed about the Tarzan level as a kid. Interesting to note, this is the newest Disney property included in the game at the time of release, and of course, now it doesn't even exist. I could have sworn Edgar Rice Burroughs was going to be one of the 13 Darknesses, kinda thought it was a layup, but I guess I was wrong. So young Pat was very excited about this world. Did it live up to the hype? Not really. I mean, at least not in retrospect. Although, in fairness, I had a questionable and inexplicable amount of hype going into it as a 5-year-old. Also, I should clarify before moving on, I was not playing this game solo as a kid. I initially played through the vast majority of it with my older cousins, so I was no child prodigy slaying the stealth sneak on Proud Mode. I think I got to the part where my wooden sword wasn't working against the shadows on Destiny Islands, and I was like, okay, yep, this is entirely too spooky to be doing by myself. But anyway, let's start out with the negative. I think like Atlantica, there aren't a ton of set pieces to pull from the movie, which makes a lot of the environments in this world feel kind of generic. Trees, and some vines, some more trees. The highlights are the camp and the treehouse, but aside from that, the world isn't terribly unique, and I wouldn't place too much blame on people for feeling lost in Deep Jungle, because at least Atlantica had those trident markers. After so many playthroughs, navigating the world is second nature to me, but I can get why it's so hard to know which rooms lead to which for first-time players. In terms of progression, Deep Jungle is one of the more backtracky worlds. Start at the treehouse, go to the camp, do the slideshow, back to the treehouse. Back to the camp, save the gorillas, one of which is, of course, at the treehouse. Go back to the camp, fight Sabor, and oh, what's that? We have to go back toward the treehouse? You ever play Chapter 4 of Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door? This kind of gives that a run for its money. Except I think in Paper Mario's case, the developers kind of knew they were fucking with you, whereas I'm not so sure Kingdom Hearts was aware that they were ping-ponging you between the same 2 locations. So yeah, it's not the pinnacle of level progression. I do appreciate the world's scope though. It does feel like an adventure, and it's the longest world up to this point and one of the longer worlds in the game. I also remember being disappointed as a kid by the culling of characters from the movie. I really like the Professor and Tantor, and they're nowhere to be seen. And even with the characters we do get, we don't get a whole lot from them, specifically all of the gorillas and Tarzan himself, actually. Of course, I understand why these characters aren't super talkative, since we're operating under the rules that Sora and company can't understand their gorilla language, but I don't know. We only get like 1 line of real dialogue from Tarzan, and we never hear anything in response from Kerchak or Kala or Turk. It's definitely a more minor complaint when compared to my other grievances, but I thought it was a shame that we didn't get all that much from half of the characters in the world. Maybe Nomura said, if we can't get Rosie O'Donnell, we're just not having any of them talk, and I won't budge on that. Can't imagine why, though. Aside from that, though, there's some cool stuff going on in this world. First of all, if you're a kid doing these worlds in their conventional order, you were probably scratching your head as to why you somehow didn't have Hercules as a party member in Olympus Coliseum, so it's really hype when you finally get a non-Donald or Goofy party member in Deep Jungle. And speaking of which, the way this world starts off is fairly unique from anything else in really the series, separating you from Donald and Goofy and pairing you up with a stranger. I mean, it kind of happens with Hollow Bastion later, but not as immediately. But seeing Tarzan go nuts on Heartless was great on a first playthrough, and I think alongside Beast, he's a party member that feels the most in their element when it comes to fighting against an invasion of evil creatures. Like, the game makes it work for all of the party members, but Tarzan didn't require too much engineering to make him feel natural in this type of environment. He's got a spear, and canonically, he kills things. In terms of other characters, at least the ones we get substantial content from, Jane is fine and all, but I really love that Brian Blessed is here to voice Clayton again. Maybe it's just me, but I really get a kick out of this performance.
A circus of clowns. What am I doing with these imbeciles? Gorillas!
Side note, you know how people always criticize the BBS heroes, and especially Terra, for not being able to tell that Master Xehanort is evil? Well, first of all, it's a dumb criticism since they have no reason to think that, and they are in fact brought up to respect and revere people who are masters. It's only obvious to us because we know what happens 10 years later, and we know that doing this with your fingers is ASL for I love murder! Anyway, Clayton is basically Master Xehanort, but if he was really, really bad at hiding the fact that he's super evil, and I'm fine with it. I think the characters all pretty much know, like, yeah, we're gonna have to kill this guy later, and who do they kill him later? Clayton's one of the few people in Kingdom Hearts to just get straight up murdered, like he's the big dead. He ain't getting brought back in a new form or with black magic. He's done, if only by the dark powers of copyright. Also, I stopped down to talk about this in my KH1 vs 2 video, but I'm a big fan of the Hollow Bastion slideshow tease that happens in this world. It's not like, oh, fun fact, one of the slides is the castle at Hollow Bastion. No, we get to see Sora come close to unknowingly spoiling the twist. He's like, I'm feeling this Kyrie-shaped indigestion when I look at this castle, but it's probably nothing. I also really like that this world serves as a sort of friendship test for Sora and specifically Donald. Up until sealing Deep Jungle's keyhole, the party was essentially a reluctant partnership, but from this point on, everyone's pretty much got each other's back. Mostly. And as a kid, I remember watching Sora in the treehouse talking to Tarzan, and he's like, yeah, you know what, forget those talking animals, where's Riku and Kairi? And at the time, I didn't give a shit about those kids. I was like, screw you, Sora, what about Donald and Goofy? Now that these characters have had like 4 full games traveling together, it's fun that we have these few moments we can look back on where they're at odds, if only for a short amount of time, and if only to stay true to Donald being kind of an asshole. Last thing, I'm not crazy on the KH1 minigames in general, as previously stated, but you know, the Jungle Slider minigame is pretty cool. The devs knew that was the coolest thing about the movie, so they found a way to work it in. Vines, on the other hand, yeah, I don't know about that. So you beat Traverse Town and you see 2 worlds for you to choose from. They have different difficulty rankings, one has 1 star and one has 2 stars. Well, conventional wisdom would take you to the least difficult world with 1 star, and it's, Wonderland. Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen clips of Alice in Wonderland before, but I mean, I don't know if I've seen it from start to finish. Now, maybe that mirrors your experience, maybe it doesn't, but I'm hard-pressed to believe that too many people were, like, super amped to land in Wonderland the first time they disembarked from the gummy ship. In fact, I'd have to assume, if only by process of elimination, that Alice in Wonderland has to be the least significant movie out of the ones that get the KH1 treatment, at least in 2002. Nowadays, it's probably more relevant and important to our cultural consciousness than something like a Tarzan, but that movie was practically fresh out of the theaters when KH1 came out. Obviously, not every world can be one of your favorite childhood movies, but I always thought it was a strange choice that they decided to lead with Wonderland. It's the Disney World they intend for you to visit first, and I remember feeling pretty nonplussed as a kid. Alice in Wonderland was just not one of the big names, at least according to young Pat, so he kinda just had to sit through what felt like a pretty underwhelming first Disney World until he got to some more recognizable stuff. If we were back in 2002 and we knew this crazy game coming out was gonna feature 9 Disney Worlds to run around and explore, I'm not sure how often Wonderland shows up in someone's first 10 or 12 picks for that draft. That's not to suggest that it being an oddball pick makes it a bad world, that would be silly. I'm just saying I really do find it strange that this is what they put at the front of the pack. Aside from that, my only other real qualm with the world is the sort of boxy approach to some of the rooms, specifically the Queen's Castle and Lotus Forest. My friend and I were discussing this a while ago. Maybe it's a stylistic choice, but some of the environments look kind of tacky and a bit thrown together. You can sort of explain away the strange geometry of the areas because, well, it's Wonderland, so things are weird, but I don't know. I was saying I wonder if this was like the first world they put together and they were still getting their footing, or the last one and they just kind of threw it together last minute. I'm probably wrong on either count, but whatever. Now, despite my whining about its spot as the first Disney World you visit, there's still some wow factor just in how it's the first place you're likely to travel to with Donald and Goofy in tow and a mission in mind. Right up front, Sora has a great and I think underrated character moment. It's really the first time he displays selflessness, and for a total stranger. Sora's willing to fight for someone he doesn't know, and he basically goes as far as he can in breaking literally the only rule of interstellar travel, which is no muddling. Sora is established, I think, right here as a character who will put himself at risk if it means helping another person, and so when he makes choices like these on a much more consequential scale later on, it feels like a natural progression for him. And speaking of how story is handled in this world, I love that we get into the habit here of not making the Disney World strictly self-contained. The introduction of Alice here is our first real exposure to and interaction with the villain's plot, and I love that she's snatched up and taken away halfway through the world. I was floored as a kid that you actually complete and leave this world and Alice is still nowhere to be found. I mean, we, the players, find out shortly after who has her, but the fact that Sora and company visit this Disney World and leave it without answers is something to be admired, I think. I know it's not like a huge bombshell of an event, but I love that KH1, and in this case Wonderland, had a moment, however small, that impacts the plot at large. We learn here that these Disney Worlds aren't just always insulated side episodes. In terms of level design, I hear talk about how Wonderland is confusing, but I tend to give it a pass in this case because it's purposefully confusing and absurd, and it works with the mythos of the source material in my opinion. The reason I take more issue with it in a world like Atlantica or Deep Jungle is because there's nothing about those movies that should cause me to expect their worlds to be zany and disorienting and tricky to navigate, but in Wonderland, left is right and up is fuck you, so I have no problem with it. The world itself is really only 5 rooms, so it's on the smaller side, but the gold here is in the Bazaar room. I'm sure plenty of games did something like this before and since, but I love the idea of a room being incredibly different depending on which way you enter it, and being able to interact with objects in one version of the room that has effects on what you're able to do in other parts. It's great. On one hand, I complained about Wonderland being a relatively soft starting point for the Disney Worlds, but on the other, it really gives KH1 the chance to show you up front just how creative it can be. I've said it before and I'll say it again, one of my favorite aspects of KH1 is its mysterious atmosphere, and Wonderland has that in spades. And clubs and hearts and diamonds. Boo! Boo! Bad. That's just bad. Next. Yeah, I probably deserve to be eaten by a giant space whale after a joke that bad. Look, I know, Monstro is too high. It should be number 13 or 12, 11 at the absolute highest. Pat, you just got done saying how you're okay with the world being tricky to navigate if that makes sense with regard to the source material. What about Pinocchio is so topsy-turvy to you that it excuses this kind of level design, Pat? No, I know, I agree with you. While Monstro is certainly confusing on purpose, I'm not sure why it is. I suppose the inside of a whale's digestive system would look pretty samey, but there have been other games that have levels take place inside of a giant creature that takes some liberties in making unique and standout environments. Mainly I have Ocarina of Time and Ape Escape in mind. Monstro is made up of 10 rooms, 2 of which are boss arenas, and another 6 are chambers with the same colored floor, walls, and ceiling. In fairness, only 4 of these rooms have any real depth to them. Chambers 1 and 4 are basically squishy vestibules. Unlike a Deep Jungle or Atlantica, the game definitely wants you to get lost and struggle with getting through it, and I think that's apparent both in the similarly designed rooms and the plainly named chambers 1 through 6. So I appreciate the self-awareness of presenting this world as a sort of labyrinth, but that still doesn't make it all too fun to explore. My younger self dreaded having to deal with Monstro. I would always get lost and usually have to swallow my pride and look up how to get through. Which, by the way, during my earliest playthroughs of this game on my own, the internet was still a bit primitive. No YouTube yet for video guides, just text-based stuff on sites like GameFAQs. And I don't think I even really fully understood the internet until about 2004 or 5, so when I say I had to get help by looking it up, I meant via this bad boy. This thing was like my Bible as a kid. I could do a whole video on just this book. This is real literature right here. Anyway, yes, purposefully confusing layout, but nonetheless still a bit unpleasant to navigate. Here's a life hack though: if you want to just get through from the mouth to the first parasite cage battle, you can always just go through the entrance that's closest to and in front of you. Starting with the left elevated entrance in Chamber 1, if you follow that rule, you'll always get to Chamber 4 just fine. So if I just conceded that Monstro isn't the most fun world to play, why do I have it as high as I do? It's because of everything else in this world. It's this high in spite of the actual level design. I don't think it's a new or hot take to say that KH1 fits into a 3-act structure, but it's probably arguable as to where these acts transition from one to the other. I think Act 3 definitely starts with Hollow Bastion, even though there's only really 2 worlds left at that point. Now, Acts 1 and 2 are trickier, but I like to consider Monstro the start of Act 2. I think conventional logic would probably point to Act 1 ending and Act 2 starting when you make your return trip to Traverse Town, and I wouldn't really argue with that either. After all, that first batch of Disney Worlds leaves the Villain Council completely intact, and it isn't until Agrabah that you start to put a dent in it, so maybe it's weird to leave that world in Act 1, but I feel like Monstro is a bit more of a turning point than the second visit to Traverse Town. You could argue that Monstro is an invalid choice for this type of pivotal spot, since it's technically optional, and I really can't argue with that, but you have to admit that there's a lot packed into this level, and it's actually stuff of consequence. I would argue that while most Disney Worlds in this game are Disney levels with a Kingdom Hearts coat of paint, Monstro is the closest thing to a Kingdom Hearts level with a Disney coat of paint. And there's one other world coming up that I think is in contention for that description. Now, you've got Pinocchio and Geppetto here, sure, and you're inside Monstro, but really all of the attention and action here is focused on the drama between Sora and Riku. While Maleficent was definitely planting seeds during that Traverse Town visit, and we the players see Riku do some bad stuff in Agrabah, it's here in Monstro where Riku is first openly antagonistic towards Sora. The whole world is a vehicle to showcase this tension between these two characters, and I know that they only share a few scenes together while we're here, but it did a damn good job in getting me excited for where the story was going and more invested in the play of our 3 original characters. And when the world opens with a flashback of Sora and Riku as kids back when they were best of friends on the islands, it makes the incoming drama all the more upsetting to watch. We know Sora and Riku both want the same thing, to save Kairi, but whereas Sora doesn't mind shouldering the additional responsibilities of stopping the Heartless and searching for the king and taking time to help the people he meets, Riku derides him for getting distracted, and he's willing to pursue any means to justify his ends. That includes aligning with Maleficent and the Heartless, and that includes kidnapping somebody's son and trading his life for another. I have to take a step back and remember that this is a Disney game sometimes. Of course, this exchange also gave us one of the best out-of-context moments in the series.
I have some unfinished business with this puppet.
And this world ends with Riku giving into the darkness and gaining the power to control the Heartless, which was a real oh shit, it's about to get real moment for me. The world starts with these innocent memories of simpler times, and it ends with what is essentially the event horizon for Riku's character, something that he'll struggle to make amends for years and years after the fact. To quote some old dude, I think it's very well done. So that's the bulk of what I enjoy about the world, but there's a few other things too. The mouth is like such a great room. If we're picking the best room in each world, the mouth has got to be the pick for Monstro. In terms of starting areas for each world, it's almost unparalleled in terms of setting the atmosphere, and I think you might know what the main competition is for that title. But basically, is this not the comfiest and coziest looking chasm filled with shipwreckage and whale saliva you've ever seen? And this room has Cleo, so that alone makes it a winner. Also, I know I haven't talked about the music at all, because if I did, I would just be stopping down in each world to say, hey, the music here is really good, because Yoko wish Imamura could sneeze into a tin can and loop it for 3 minutes and it would still sound beautiful. But I love the field music in Monstro. It's called A Very Small Wish, and it's one of my favorite tracks in the series. For me, it's just this incomparable blend of mystique and adventure, whimsy and intrigue. It's soothing, but it's also a bop. And to talk about the actual Pinocchio characters for a moment, I love how they're used too. Their introduction goes toward building up that dire atmosphere of homes being destroyed and people being separated, part of the KH1 mythos. Geppetto and Pinocchio going to great lengths to find each other is true to the spirit of the movie, and here it's happening on a grander scale, but it still works in a Kingdom Hearts context. It's also great that completing this world relocates them to Traverse Town, a noted world for refugees like the Final Fantasy crew and the Dalmatians. Last thing, I was just so hyped as a kid when Riku joins you in your first fight against the Parasite Cage. I was like, oh shit, what a crew, 3 party members, are you kidding me? I held out hope that maybe Riku would get his head out of his ass and join the crew, which made his continued betrayal all the more crushing. While I consider Monstro the start of Act 2, the rubber really starts to hit the road in Agrabah in my opinion. On a more superficial level, Aladdin was the most prominent Disney property in my eyes up to this point, and I was even more excited for it than I was for Deep Jungle. This is the first world where we come face to face with a Disney villain of any actual consequence. I guess they vetted Clayton and the Queen of Hearts and they just didn't make the cut.
What am I doing with these imbeciles?
I touched on this in KH1 vs 2, but taking out Jafar here is like the first real blow you deal against Maleficent and the Villain Council, and it feels like a substantial accomplishment since the cutscenes frame Jafar as second in command. And seeing Maleficent afterwards show absolutely no remorse is great. She's like, yeah, dumbass had it coming. Obviously, you were probably supposed to know beforehand that she's, you know, super evil, but her discarding him offhandedly is like, oh, you're evil, but you're a huge bitch, too. Back when Maleficent was a force to be reckoned with. I wouldn't be surprised if her end goal was to just completely screw over everyone in the group once she gets her hands on the final keyhole, that is, if they survive that long. It's hard to believe the camaraderie between the villains could be taken at face value and that they would all rule their respective homeworlds in a fair 6-way split. Like, nah, I think Maleficent's probably not going to settle for less than everything. Agrabah is set up similarly to Wonderland, with Alice and Jasmine sharing the same role in each world, but I think the stakes feel higher with the plight of the princess in Agrabah. Both are in the clutches of the villains while we're there, but whereas Alice is imprisoned in this goofy kangaroo court with no affiliation to Maleficent or her group, Jasmine is stuck with the creepy landlord who's going to pawn her off to the lady with the horns. In addition, nobody in Wonderland is really invested in what happens to Alice. The closest thing is the Cheshire Cat being like, oh yeah, that's going on, isn't it? Aladdin serves as a good motivating factor for the player to want to see Jasmine return to safety. I do wish Jasmine was given more to do or say, because she's kind of relegated to damsel in distress duty for pretty much the entire time, and she's much better than that in the movie. Also, you know what, and this goes for pretty much all of the Disney worlds in the council, I love that they're really not working on their own side projects in each world. Jafar shows literally no interest in marrying Jasmine or becoming Sultan or any of that crap because he's busy doing Kingdom Hearts shit. Another reason why I always prefer the KH1 Disney worlds over KH2. If I wanted to watch the movies, I'd watch the movies. When it comes to Disney and Final Fantasy, the series is at its best when familiar characters are in new places and situations. And even if they're in their typical environments like Jafar and Agrabah, they're doing something different. They have new goals and revised ambitions, but nothing that rings false for their characters. Speaking of the villain's goal, I love how the second half of the world is sort of framed as a race for the keyhole. Within the Disney world, it's the closest the bad guys get to succeeding, and as a kid, it was really exciting chasing Jafar into the Cave of Wonders. When you get that scene of Jafar forcing Genie to reveal the keyhole, I was like, oh shit. In hindsight, I'm not really sure what Jafar could have done with it in the moment, like if the plan was to just know where it is and kill Sora before he could steal it, that obviously wasn't going to happen. So in hindsight, maybe it's not a huge deal, but I didn't know it was going to happen. Kingdom Hearts had been breaking precedents up to that point. We went to Wonderland and lost Alice, we went to Olympus Coliseum and didn't fight Hades, so I didn't know what to expect. Last thing on the story beats, I like how this world wraps up with Aladdin asking Sora to find Jasmine and to have Genie go along with him. It ups the stakes just a little bit. Now you're searching for Kairi, Alice, and Jasmine, and the friend you made here is depending on you. I don't know about you, but I partly had Aladdin in mind when I was storming the castle in Hollow Bastion later, because we're bros and I promised I'd help him out. It's another great side effect of the Disney stuff being woven into the main plot. In this case, it helped make some characters feel relevant to the overall story long after the spotlight had left them. I spent a lot of time on the story here because I don't have too much to say about the world design. I think it's serviceable. On the whole, I think Agrabah is just a solid world with few outstanding negatives or positives. While I vastly prefer the layout and structure of the world in KH1, I do think that both the city and the cave are much more pleasant to look at in KH2. I like that the world is essentially essentially split into two halves, both design and story-wise. Your first half has you running around the city, and the second half takes place entirely in the Cave of Wonders. I'm glad that we're not running back and forth from one point to the other a la Deep Jungle. Also, I know it's not like mind-bending stuff, but I appreciate the puzzle-solving aspects in this world, even if it's really just opening some keyholes to raise gates or smacking this pillar to open up the lamp chamber. Having small obstacles like these just makes a world satisfying to explore and progress through, as opposed to just having it all laid out in front of me. Lastly, how about there being 4 boss fights in this world? For a one-visit Disney World, that's a crazy amount. I wish it was a model they followed more often, specifically in a game like KH3. Like how KH1 gave us a unique Agrabah Heartless boss in the form of Pot Centipede and also gave us Jafar, give us the Lump of Horror and Monstropolis if you want, but let us fight Randall at the end too. Same with Skull and Hans or Grim Guardianess and Mother Gothel. As long as you're not sacrificing too much exploration or world space, more boss fights are always better in my book. Also, Sora's lucky that Genie isn't like one of those dickhead genies who needs incredibly specific wording, because get rid of these guys is a very open-ended request.
Genie, get rid of these guys!
That's gonna do it for part 1, guys. Initially this was going to be one big video, but as I was writing down my thoughts, I noticed I had a lot of them, so this thing probably would have ended up being over an hour if I kept it in one piece. Personally, I don't mind longer videos, but I didn't want to scare anyone away from this one. I'm sure I'll end up doing other long-form ranking or discussion projects in the future, so let me know if you'd rather them be one video or split in half for easier consumption. Like a big pill that you break apart so you can more easily get your intake of my bad opinions. Also, I'd like to hear how you'd rank these first 6 worlds, and you could provide your reasoning or not. I'm not trying to give you homework. And if you can guess how I'll order the last 7 worlds, I'll call you a totally rad dude. I just emptied my pockets, and that's all I could find. For reference, that's Destiny Islands, End of the World, Halloween Town, Hollow Bastion, Olympus Coliseum, Neverland, and Traverse Town still left to be ranked and agonizingly discussed. Thanks so much for watching. I know it's a small operation we've got going here, but I've really enjoyed getting to talk to you guys in the comments and connecting with people who appreciate these games as much as I do. Part 2 should be out relatively soon, so stay tuned for that. Had a good few people come on board after my last video, so welcome to you all. Thanks for allowing me into your most sacred space, your row of YouTube subscription videos. I really appreciate your support, and if I had a heart, this is where I would die of happiness. As a smarmy vizier turned ripped genie once said,
This is the end. Ugh!